Here today. My name is Debbie Duncan. I am the Director of Education Services for the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits. Our webinar today is entitled Creating Space for Everyone, and we will be going through Yvette Murry will be taking you through some interactive exercises and explanations. I'm sure you will appreciate it. Yvette has been a New Jersey Center for Nonprofits board member. She has been involved as a consultant, as an instructor, and just a general supporter. So we're really always happy to see Yvette here with us. Um, just to review very briefly a little bit about the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits, we are here to provide primarily three things. Uh, the One of the big things we do is our advocacy. We work on improving conditions, policies, and legislation that benefit the nonprofit sector, and we educate nonprofit leaders on what is happening and how to help us advocate when we need it. Make sure you're on our email list to get our alerts when they go out every so often. We also do a little bit of research. We just finished our annual New Jersey Trends poll, and that report will be coming out. In fact, we just scheduled the webinar explaining it, which will be March 7th. I'll tell you more about that later. We provide education, such as this webinar, our annual conference. We have some publications and other materials that we can share with you about running your organization effectively, legally, and with using best practices. And then finally, we are a membership organization, and our members get certain benefits, such as discounts on everything. For example, this webinar is free to members, and we have our help desk. If you're a member, you get priority service with our help desk. We also have free job postings, and there are other cost savings benefits. So, if you're not a member, check us out. I want to introduce Kathy Hahn, who's here with us today, and she is our membership director. So she's the person who would be helping you understand your membership and make clear what how to join and what it means to be a member. And we really appreciate our members. Most of you on this call are members. Also, we are a member of the National Council of Nonprofits. So there are state associations for nonprofits across the country. So wherever you are, or if you have friends and colleagues in other states, please tell them to go to their state association and get to know them, find out what they're doing, and find out what's going on.
Yvette Murry. I am the president of YRM Consulting Group. I am a clinical social worker, a certified coach, and have been working in the nonprofit sector since I left college, which was yesterday. I have worked in a range of fields, everything from domestic violence and public health, mental health, folks with addictions, IDD populations. So I love the sector, I love the field, and can't imagine doing anything else. Can you go to the next slide, Deb?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So what our firm does is we actually work with individuals and with organizations to really help them to build their capacity to serve the folks they serve. So we work from the inside out. So we work with individuals to really help them to both build their skills in the work that they actually do on the ground, but we also work with individuals to make sure that they're taking care of themselves so they can be the best they can be as they're doing the work. We also work with organizations so that they can be human-centered as well as client-centered in the way that we provide services so that people aren't burning out, that we actually can continue to love the work we do, and that we can bring our full humanity to the work. Next slide. What are you hoping to get from it? What do you want to walk away with? I know it's all about me, but I thought I'd ask about you.
I just like to take any opportunity that's available to sharpen, strengthen, and learn like better communication skills. And I feel like now more than ever, it's important to really like just tap into our compassion and empathy. And because we're all doing work for communities and for people in need, but we also need to take care of ourselves. And through that, as teams, like we do that on how we communicate and how we interact with each other. So that's why I'm here.
Anyone ever go online? Like go online that's not work related? How's that been?
What do
Do
you
you
what do you
send
mean
like
by
like on Facebook or something? Like if you're
yeah,
commenting,
what do you mean by go online?
Whatever rabbit hole you might go under.
Many times.
lots of
And
miscommunication, lots of
yeah,
I've been told that um when I use proper grammar, like if I put a period at the end of something, apparently that's um like I'm being forceful when I say I'm like, it's the end of a sentence. I put the period. So, but a lot, with texting now and having a hard to hear tone, um, you know, like my dad will send something and it's all in caps, and I said, "Why are you yelling at me?" So things like that I've noticed.
it's funny. It took me a long time to get my mother to stop doing things in caps. She just insisted. I'm like, you do know you're screaming. No, I'm not. And then I don't remember what something happened at some point, and I was like, see, I told you you're screaming. And but it took ages. But she finally has learned that that's not a good look. So yeah, I mean, even if something, texting has rules. Other folks about those rabbit holes we might. I mean, I wasn't even a social media person until relatively recently. Other things that you sort of the rabbit holes you might go down and how communication shows up.
I mean, not to bring politics into the mix, but
No, get out, Claudia. We were not going to talk
um,
about that.
no, but
Yeah,
that's
on,
I think
Claudia.
I
Good
feel
luck with
like
that.
that's probably a main. There's a lot of confusion. There's a lot of hostility with when it comes to that. And I think everybody wants to communicate what they're feeling, but it's always coming out the wrong way. So I try to avoid those. I what is it? Defriended a lot of people on
Well,
social
and
media.
not
And
just go ahead,
go ahead.
Claudia. Sorry.
No, I don't watch that much news. I try not to I live in my bubble of happiness and joy until somebody comes and pokes it. But sometimes it's just better for me at least, right? Just to keep my sanity.
Well, we don't have it. We actually don't have the luxury not to know.
Yes, I agree with
Because
you.
at
Yes.
the end of the day, decisions that are made directly impact the work we do.
Hmm.
Because the
Yes.
decisions that are made impact the client, the people we work with, they impact our own livelihoods, they impact the kind of funding that happens. And I mean, so we can't be, ostriches. We can't put our head in the sand and go, well, let me know when it's all over.
I feel like I do that a
I don't
lot.
want to have an opinion. I'm just going to sit here and let me know. So those conversations are conversations we need to have. And
Yes.
those are conversations that need to be in the mix. And you want to Emery, you want to jump in? I saw you go, oh, I don't want to.
I didn't really, but it's all we talk about.
Hmm.
It's all we talk about at work. It's
Yeah.
all day, every day.
Yeah.
There's no getting away from it. It is what is being talked about, discussed, figured out, trying to understand how do we live by, it's all consuming.
Hmm. It's nerve-wracking. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very stressful. Yeah.
So one of my hopes for today is for us, and I put me in this as well, because as I was putting it together. I mean, I live in the same world you live in, and trying to figure out what are some ways that we can hone our communication to be able to have conversations that aren't just the words, but also do resonate in our bodies, because they're doing both. They're vibrating on multiple levels, and how to set frameworks that seek to limit the way the vibration happens. So we're not like sort of doing damage to our bodies while it's happening, but we also are able to do the kind of work we need to do. So if you can go to the next slide, please. One of the things that's really important when we think about making sure that every voice is heard is that there needs to be a collective obligation. And that obligation's to each member of our team. It also is an obligation that can happen just one-on-one. So the first thing we want to make sure we're doing is that we're checking in with ourselves and that we are clear that we have our own self-regulation happening. That means that we're calm and we're ready to actually engage the other person. If you're not feeling that you're in a really good space to have a conversation, then more than likely you want to wait. And if you don't have the opportunity to actually be able to take some time away, then you really want to just sort of sit for a second, take some really slow, deep breaths before you actually engage the other person. Because when we don't do this, we're more likely to say things we don't mean to say, or it comes out in a way that we hadn't really anticipated. The other part when we're talking about our agreement with each other is that we're being as authentic as possible. And that needs to be something that's said from the beginning. But in order to be authentic, I also need to be able to trust that the other person is going to be honest about their thoughts and feelings. And in order for me to be honest, there has to be trust. And the other person has to believe that what I'm saying is where I am in this moment, which also requires bravery. And the more trust I have, the more brave I can be. That we're going to share both the time and the space together. So what this means is that we are not going to overtalk each other. We're going to make a point. We're going to try to do it in less than, maybe 2 minutes, and that we're going to stop and allow the other person space to actually be able to respond. That if your goal is to persuade someone else and change their mind, more than likely what's going to happen is they're going to dig their heels in and they're going to be fighting to also be heard and to persuade the other person back. And that really is not going to be helpful because everyone's working to be right and not necessarily to come to some place that everyone can sort of say, all right, I may not walk away with everything, but I can walk away at least with an understanding of where someone else may be coming from. We need to speak from our own experience. It's not my job, nor is it someone else's job to tell me what my experience is, or to tell me, well, maybe it wasn't really that. Maybe it was these 10 things. My experience is my experience, and I don't need another person to explain what they think my experience might have been. To listen for understanding, that if I don't have that experience, my job is just to try to understand what the context may be. And I'm going to hear things based on what my life experience has been. And that may take a little more. So in that, I need to really make sure that I am listening for not just understanding, but also for the care of the other person. And that goes back to the community care. I may need to actually be curious. I may need to ask for additional information. I may need to reach out, not just to that person, but I may need to expand my knowledge base. And when we think about confidentiality, confidentiality is that information that a person shares, that stays here. but the knowledge we can take out and that actually spreads and we share that outside of ourselves. As I mentioned earlier, to be curious and to be humble, that in no way do I know, or any of us know, everything about everything. To really sort of sit and think, well, what don't I know? And to be an informed not knower, to expect that there are things that you just will walk away with you never considered. One of the things I love about my job is I never walk out the same way I walked in. And then leave space for silence, which is really difficult for most of us, especially, we're in a society that every minute needs to be filled with sound. And in the silence, sometimes that's where our greatest learning comes. When we think about communication, there's something called a communication feedback loop. And in that communication feedback loop, one person is sharing information and the other person is taking that information in. It's going through their lens, and their lens is all their life experience, all they know about the world, what they believe they know about the other person. And that's not just the other person, what they know about them, but what they know about their community, what they know about people like them, what they know about what their perceptions are. And then they respond. Now, in the middle of that, there's all this noise. And the noise can be actual noise. It could be noise from outside. You might be in an office where there's a lot of noise going on. You're in cubicles, so you might necessarily not hear the person. So the words they're using, you may think they said one thing and the words become distorted. You may have a language barrier that goes on, or you may actually have where people actually have different learning styles. Maybe I am deaf, so the communication that's happening may not be happening well. I was just on a webinar, and I actually am a person that very often will read lips, and I also need closed captioning. And in the meeting I was in, they didn't have closed captioning. It made it very difficult for me to understand what was happening in the meeting. So we need to take into account that people both hear information differently or consume information differently. And then we think about neurodiversity. That's another way that there can be a communication feedback loop that doesn't always work the way your communication feedback loop works. So we need to take that into consideration when we're giving people information. Some of us are learners who are visual learners. They need to see it. So for some people, doing this kind of learning with someone speaking at you, you're just like, I don't know. For others of you, just looking at the deck in front of you, that works. You never need to have anyone actually speak to you. For other folks, you need both the verbal and you need the visual. So that also is a way we need to be mindful of how communication and messages are actually sent between people. So here are some ways that there are roadblocks, or they could be landmines that happen when we are communicating with each other. One of the things that sometimes happen is that you might be in communication with someone and you or the other person might start ridiculing the other person and the way that they actually are communicating. You may find that this happens in bullying, and unfortunately there is bullying in the workplace. There might be bullying in other parts of your life where someone is ridiculed for not knowing something. They may be ridiculed or bullying for the way that they approach their work or the way they approach the world. Ridiculing really is undermining someone's self-esteem and the way they show up in the world, and very often it's demeaning. You also have where someone is criticized. In lieu of actually lifting them up and working with someone to figure out, gee, where might the gaps be? that the idea is it's really a power structure where it's power over versus shared power. And when I'm criticizing you, I'm not working to help to solve or to move the conversation forward. I'm letting you know that, I don't think you're very smart. I think that I know more than you do. So criticizing, again, is not something that really helps to move a conversation. There also are places where people may be threatening or warning. And very often in those circumstances, the person that you're engaging or the people you're engaging, very often people will just shut down. Because ultimately, and we're going back to power, and a lot of these roadblocks come from power differentials. When someone is being threatened, very often they then start to, again, retreat. And they may wind up putting them in a situation where they then feel that they have no value, or what they'll do is they actually will start to avoid in threatening. You may have a situation where it becomes a moral conversation. And in a situation where people are actually being moralized, and there is a strong right or a strong a strong right or a strong wrong, what then will happen is that you'll have folks who actually decide, well, I'm not going to think about what might be the possible options. I'm just going to do what you say is the right or wrong way to do it. And at that point, you then limit creativity. You limit the individual or the group's ability to actually come up with possible solutions or possible ways of doing a particular thing. Ordering people to do things in a particular way. Again, when you are ordering people to do something in a particular way, what winds up happening is that you put yourself in a situation where you're the only voice in the room. And very often, what people will do is they will actually start to do it the way you ask them to do it. And you also may find when you're ordering people to do it, they will put less thought into how something's done. I've watched this happen when people are doing tasks like, say, a newsletter. It's like, oh, well, you want it done this way? I'll just do what you say. And what'll happen is that people will not take any time to think about it. They'll just do it as you say. You'll mark it up. You'll send it back. And they're like, okay, they'll make the changes. And what ultimately you become the only person that they seek to please. And I cannot tell you the number of times that I've watched, in the case of, say, of a newsletter, it'll get marked up. People will make the change. It'll get marked up the opposite way. They'll just make the change. And it comes back over and over again. Lecturing. Lecturing puts you again in a position where you're the only person that knows. So for most of these, it just comes down to you're the authority, and the person or people that you're working with wind up just giving you all the power. And while it may sound great that you get all the power, what it ultimately puts is that you get to be the only person in the room. And if you're the only person in the room, what you wind up not being able to really delegate to other folks, you wind up not getting the richness of what other people are thinking and the richness of the talent that's sitting right with you. Some of the other things that can happen is when people feel that you are humoring them or it's flattery, that people may feel that you're saying it, but you don't believe it. So when you're thinking about providing flattery, then, really ask yourself, what are my flattering people for? So saying to someone, good job, you want to be really specific. I thought you did a great job at, and then be clear about what you thought someone did that actually made their work or what they've handled specific. So I really thought you did a great job at handling that difficult customer. They are really a challenging customer, and you handled that communication because we could have lost that client, but you were able to turn the conversation around to actually make it so that it was a win-win conversation. That is where you want to go. You want to be specific. Also, be mindful of downplaying how folks are feeling. That one of the other roadblocks is to say, gee, that went well. Well, if you notice that someone's having a reaction and that their emotions have gotten involved, check in, see how they're doing. And while some may say, well, I don't have time for that, I have to just move on to the next thing. That part of the care and feeding as a manager and a supervisor is also to check in with your team. Because when people know that you are checking in with their humanity, what you'll find is they also will be much more loyal to you as a supervisor and manager in that communication and in that dialogue. Here's some questions that you may want to talk about with your team. Have people talk about what are some of the communication challenges that people face when they are working one-on-one with someone or when they're working in a team. One of the things people often talk about are people who may be perceived as aggressive. And I'm very clear to use the word perceived, because what one person may perceive as aggressive, someone else may perceive as passionate. So we want to make sure that, and as we talked about the feedback loop, we want to make sure that we're not labeling people in how a communication works. How do we talk about different types of communication? And then how do we talk about misunderstanding? And misunderstandings happen all the time, particularly when we're using technology. One of the things that I know people talk about is using all caps in an email or using it in a text, that all caps is you're screaming at me. Well, some people may not take it as I'm screaming at you. Some people may say, hey, I'm excited, and that's what that means to me. So making sure that people are on the same page about what a particular communication means. For some people, using periods, apostrophes, any kind of emoji, all of those can contribute to miscommunication. So maybe asking some of these questions in your teams to find out, what do these little small gestures, how are they perceived by the entire team? And that may help you to avoid these roadblocks and these landmines. I'm also making decisions about when is it important to actually move from a technology communication, and sometimes you may need to pick the phone up, or you may need to walk to another person's office. That there are times when you are asking yourself, well, what did this email mean? And at the point you're struggling with, am I communicating what I want to communicate? That's the time you want to pick the phone up, or you actually want to go speak to someone. Because if you're questioning, is your communication actually what you want to communicate, then you can pretty much bet the other person is asking that question as well. Also, when you're communicating, you want to be able to ask yourself, how would I answer this? So you also want to be clear. If I'm reaching out to someone, then I want to make sure that I have indicated the what, what is it that I want from the, here's why I'm reaching out. This is my goal. And what is it that I want from the other person? I'm reaching out to you because I want us to discuss X. This is what I'm hoping to get from our conversation, our engagement. When can we meet? So it's very specific. There is no gray area. It also helps the other person to prepare. So what do we need to know when we're starting this idea of communicating with each other? The first thing is, and we talked a little earlier about this, is I need to come with humility. I may have thought I communicated well, and I may not have. So I need to recognize that there may be gaps in what I thought I communicated. So I have to recognize that there may be gaps, and I have to have the courage to say out loud, I might not have gotten this right. And that's part of psychological safety. I have to feel safe enough that the other person is not going to attack me. But that again requires trust. And that trust has to be built within the group and within the culture of the organization. And that also means that it has to be built within the power structure of the organization. Are we colleagues, or are we in a hierarchical situation? Is it that if an email comes from some people, they get a different level of respect than if it comes from someone else? The next part in psychological safety is the ability to be curious. Am I willing to, or am I able to listen to others and to learn from other people? And then finally, it's a question of empathy. Do I want to understand, and am I able to step into someone else's shoes and acknowledge how someone else feels? And sometimes I don't get it. Sometimes I just may not get it. And that's where the humility comes back in. So part of the work is, and I've talked about this, is what's the big view? And the most important thing in the big view is, what is the full context? What is the culture of the organization? What is my experience with this organization? Are people able to ask questions? Are they able to explore their thoughts and their feelings about certain things? Are we able to brainstorm together? Or if you have an idea that, hey, people are going to shut it down, and that's just it. So everyone just sort of says, you know what? I choose not to have an idea. I'm not going to respond, because people who respond wind up being targeted. Don't want to do that. That's the history of this organization. So I'm just going to sit back and not have any thoughts. Also, what's the relationship? And, we talked about this a minute ago. What's the power differential in the dynamics? And you may find that the organization has one set of power dynamics, and you may work in a department or a unit that has a totally different set of dynamics. You may have a set of dynamics within your unit where there's certain people that, the flow and the way that the communication happens is very relaxed and easy, whereas there are other interpersonal dynamics that are not, and the flow is very different. And then there's physicality. And some of this is about how people position themselves. So are you someone that you're having a conversation with someone and you're busy looking at your computer as the other person is speaking with you? Or do you actually stop and pause and actually give them eye contact and your full attention? And that's something we all need to think about. The notion of multitasking, none of us multitask. All of us sequentially task. You cannot do two things at one time and be fully focused on two things. Also body movement. So not just our body language, but our body movements. That some people are very close talkers and other people need more space. And it's going to be different depending on who you're working with. What's the tone of voice? We have some people who are very loud and big talkers, and we have other people that are very quiet. What is your perception of that? And really testing and asking yourself, is your perception accurate? Which goes into our assumptions. And, what biases may we have? And what are those expectations? And are those expectations actually aligned? A lot of this very often happens as we start looking at generations. If you think about different generations, people love to talk about, oh, well, Gen X's do this and Gen Z do this. Well, quite honestly, that if you look and you start making generalizations about any group, very often the generalizations do not fit. And when we pigeonhole each other within a context that most of those people do one thing or the other, we actually wind up pigeonholing ourselves, and we pigeonhole how a communication can actually happen. And we learn a lot more when we are able to put those assumptions aside and really get to know who it is that we work with. So here's some questions that you might want to, engage in. During the training, we did this and we sort of asked ourselves these questions, and it was really interesting to see what some of the responses were from the group. So we want to actively listen, and active listening is not something that most of us do well. So to actively listen, we have to listen for understanding. And how do you know if you listen for understanding is you actually reflect back. What I think I heard you say was, the worst question we can ever ask is, does everyone agree? Rarely will you get someone that says, nope, I have no idea what you said. What you want to ask is, can you tell me what you think I said? 'Cause I want to make sure I was clear. In order to actively listen, our mouths need to be closed and our ears need to be open. But again, we need to be mindful of what are the different listening styles. So we have to be thinking about our visual, our audio. We need to be thinking about our kinesthetic. Some people are going to need to be right to write. That's part of their listening style. And we need to think about that range of how people are able to focus. And then we have that focusing, the ability to self-management, to limit the amount of distractions around us. So there are some people who, if people are whispering and there's a lot of background noise, they're not able to focus. So you may have people who want to actively listen, but ultimately there's just too much going on around them for them to be able to do it. And that within certain learning styles, that I may not be a person who's giving you direct eye contact, because again, that is something that may be cultural. Being curious, being able to ask questions, to be able to find out what's going on. And these are clarifying questions. So being able to ask how or what questions. And this is about being open-ended in our questions. This is not about challenging you. It's not about, trying to, tap into your authority. It's really trying to make sure I understand what it is that you need from me, what it is that you're asking. And then, as we talked about, keeping the focus on the other person, really monitoring your own management of your emotions, your feelings about what's going on. And understanding sometimes there are things that we're going to be asking of ourselves or others that are just not really fun things to do. And then, as I mentioned in the listening, being able to reflect back. What do you think you heard? Or paraphrasing or clarifying or summarizing or confirming what it is that's going to happen next. And if this is a pattern, and it's a pattern you're using all of the time, and you're using it with everyone all the time, then what winds up happening, it just becomes part and parcel of how you do business. My slides don't want to move. There you go. So what do we want to do? One of the things we want to think about is, how do we call people in? How to start making change with those you'd rather cancel. We all have people that we would really prefer not to engage, not to work with. It could be at home, it could be at work. There are just some folks that are not your cup of tea. But we have to be around folks that sometimes are just not our cup of tea. So the first thing we want to do is we want to think it through. We want to think about, what is it about this particular person that just doesn't sit with us well. And this is where the conflict piece comes. And we're thinking about conflict. The conflict is not always just the other person. Sometimes the conflict isn't with us. And as I mentioned earlier, the conflict really may be, I just don't like the way you think. I just don't like the way you show up. And when we're thinking that it's about the other person, this is where we have to look at ourselves. And we have to ask ourselves, what is the thing we can do to make this the most productive way of engaging? Now, I want to be clear, I'm not suggesting that anyone should be harassed, that anyone should be abused, because in those circumstances, removing yourself is going to be the best circumstance for you. It also may be that you may need someone else to intervene if this is something that happens on a regular basis. I mean, and no, am I suggesting that? But if you're dealing with conflict, that it is important that you ask yourself, is there some way that I can approach this? And the first thing, as I mentioned earlier, is that we do need to check ourselves and to make sure that we're as calm as possible. And one of the things that I've found is when there is someone that seems that they're agitated or upset, is asking the question, how are you today? Great place to practice this is when you are calling customer service, especially at the end of the day. Call someone in customer service, they have had it. Ask the question, how are you today? And you will see that their entire attitude will change because no one asked that question. And then sometimes, are you the best messenger for a particular piece of information? And also thinking through, what is the outcome you desire? So don't go in blind. If you know that you have to give a piece of information that is not going to be potentially well taken, really think through, what are the possible ways that you might approach this if the information might not be taken well? So that you have some avenues to go through or ways that you might be able to approach this. And if things start to go in a way that is not productive, having an out and saying, you know what, maybe we need to come back to this. You know, maybe this may need to be more than one conversation. So some of the strategies is to really co-create how this conversation might go. The other, and this can happen very often when you're having groups, is the oops, ouch, whoa model. That there may be conversations that need to be had, and people might have their toes stepped on. So it might be an oops, you kind of stepped on my toes there, and I need us to take a break, which is sort of just kind of lightly. You might have an ouch that wait a minute, that kind of hurt a little more, or you might have, whoa, time out. We need this conversation to stop. That I feel like I've been harmed. And these now are when you're talking about, in particular, really conversations that the organization may need to have that are thorny. And when you're having those kind of conversations, very often I would encourage you to bring a facilitator in to have that conversation. Those are the kinds of conversations you probably don't want to do on your own. And then you don't want to hide from issues. If something has come up, the worst thing you can do is hope that it goes away. It's not going to go away. It's going to fester and it's going to get worse. So address situations when they show up and listen to what people are saying, not what you want them to say, but really listen to what people are saying, because festering is the best way to destroy an organization's culture and to destroy the morale. And Once morale is destroyed, getting it back is near impossible. So here's some checklists for psychological safety in an organization. If you make a mistake on the team, it's not held against you, so that everyone can actually speak, and it's not one or two people always speaking so they feel like they're getting targeted. And I see this a lot in organizations where you have one or two people who are constantly feeling like they're stepping up for the entire group, and they are wind up being the folks that are seen as the bad news bears. They're the ones who wind up being seen as not team players. So you really want the group to be able to say when something's sort of happening, that members of the team can bring up problems and tough issues, and you work together to solve whatever those things may be before they even get to be problems, and they're just tough issues. People on the team sometimes accept others for being different, and there's nothing wrong with being different because there's strength in difference. That it's safe to take a risk on the team. That when you have folks who are taking risks, what you will find is that it makes your organization much more agile. It isn't difficult to ask other members of the team for help. No one on this team would deliberately act in a way that undermines my efforts. And this is something that needs to be monitored. And this needs to be monitored both from supervisory level, management team, and leadership. People also need to know that their experience is validated, and working with team members of this team, that their skills and their talents are valued and utilized, that the members of the team are being asked, hey, what do you want to get out of your job? How do you want to participate in the work of this organization? What talents do you want to expand in the work of this organization? The more that people feel that they are part of the growth and development and future, the more likely they will be invested, and you'll find that they're more likely to stay within the confines of the organization and grow. So some basic questions to ask yourself, once you leave and finish the video. So what? What stood out for you? Now what? What might you do differently? How might you start the conversation of being inclusive in your communication of the organization? What do people want? What might you do differently? And why is this important? Now that you've had an opportunity to think about how do you bring all kinds of communication styles into the organization, why is it important? And what is it that each of the people in your organization want to get as part of the communication continuum? And what you'll find is you'll have an organization that everyone wants to speak up, everyone wants to participate, and everyone wants your organization to be a healthy organization. For information, please stay in touch, both on this topic, and we have lots of other training and coaching services. My email and our website is here, and we would love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Yvette. This was very informative and thought-provoking and challenging, which is great. Just want to let everybody know that this is only the first of a series of 3 webinars that Yvette is doing for us. The next one will be on March 19th at 12 noon also, again, another Wednesday at noon. Gatekeeping Unlocked, Smart Strategies for Better Communication. We will examine formal and informal ways of gatekeeping, how gatekeeping affects their communication, decision-making, and innovation in our organizations. So I don't have that on the website yet. It'll be up hopefully in the next day or 2 for you to register. We also have some other upcoming events. This Friday, very important, we have a webinar called Beyond the Ruling, Strategies to Safeguard Nonprofits in a Shifting Legal Landscape. This again is the first of a series of 4. Lloyd Freeman, who is an attorney in Trenton, is going to be talking about a lot of the confusion, especially around things like DEI. Okay, what do the executive orders mean? What is legal? What isn't? What do we have to be aware of? And what are things that don't have to be affected by these decisions? Obviously, things change, but he did an excellent job at the center's conference in December to kind of help clarify and help answer questions for nonprofits. We also will have the results of our 2025 survey. The state of New Jersey's nonprofit community is an annual event, and we will go over what feedback we've gotten from all of you on the situation you find yourselves in now and what you think the future is going to bring. So I encourage everybody, that'll be Friday, March 7th at 10 a.m. I don't have that on the slide. On Wednesday, March 12th, Pro Bono Partnership is an organization that offers legal services to nonprofits exclusively. They have one on corporate housekeeping, on how to run your nonprofit board, that I thought might be of interest to people. And we also, that same day, we have a monthly event that we just started. This will be our 3rd meeting, Policy World Wednesdays. We host this together with the Council of New Jersey Grant Makers, and we invite nonprofit staff and funders, grant makers, et cetera, to participate in this discussion of where things are going in the policy arena. And then we have, I want to make sure that you all know that we invite you to become a member if you're not. This is an investment in your organization. There are some economic benefits like the free job postings and discounts to all of our educational programs, either free or, for example, our nonprofit conference in December is about 30% off for members. Anyway, please contact us, let us know what we can do to help you and how membership might benefit you. If you're on this, seeing this webinar, you have until March 26th to get a 10% discount on your annual dues. The discount code, you go to our website and go to the membership portal and you use the discount code HORSE and J, all one word, and that will give you a 10% discount on your membership. Again, thank you very much, Yvette. Here is her contact information again, and I hope that you will find this helpful and